Hey everyone, I am Scott King, and thanks for joining us for this episode of the Union Podcast, where we talk about AI, technology, people, systems, and how to get more done with technology. So today, I'm joined by the usual suspects. Kraus is our product manager. Hi, Chris.
How's it going, Scott?
It's going well. And we're privileged to have John Michelsen, our Chief Product Officer or Chief Geek, joining us. Hey, John.
Scott.
So today we want to discuss some common use cases for AI with documents, right? So how do I get AI to help me disseminate knowledge, answer questions based on my own content, right? So John, generative AI has gained a lot of traction, and then companies are just buried. They have mountains of documents and tons of data, and the data resides in all sorts of places. But give us an idea of we've got three different use cases that we want to talk about. Kind of level set why this is a big deal, and what we should be doing with our documents to help our people find intelligent answers.
Yeah, well, Scott, big question, but a simple answer is, how about we've not done very well at this? Historically, there's lots of knowledge management systems, but they are themselves silos. Enterprise data is stored in systems of record. That needs to be part of the whole solution. These flat files, we transfer them around, so they're stuck in folders, and so we have a big mess. The good news is that we can use some combinations of techniques and technologies, including, yes, generative AI in parts, in order to make a pretty elegant solution and raise the bar in terms of people's ability to gather knowledge or get answers quickly.
And then what's the real challenge? So if we have all these documents, obviously it's one finding, right? So we were even trying to search in our OneDrive to find a certain document, and it was a nightmare. Couldn't find it. Is the challenge search? Is it, is it not being able to answer or ask the right question? Is it like a prompt engineering issue? Like, what's the main challenge of the information exists, but I just can't get an answer?
Well, there are a number of things to unpack here. The first, you can think of this as one document at a time, or search for the right document. That's probably not going to end up giving you the best answer to the general problem that we have, though, because before you ever know what document you're looking for, you have to ask a good question. Asking a good question is actually sometimes more challenging than we think, because people imply context really easily. If I said recently, every one of us would probably have a different span of time in mind. I might have meant that related to the just started football season, and I meant that as in the last few days. But then you talk to someone who does evolutionary geography, and this could be, eons and eons as recent. So it's tough to ask good questions, but we do need to be good at that. What technology can do to help is make vast amounts of information available for us to ask good questions of. And we have to solve the garbage in, garbage out problem, right? Because no one's got a bunch of clean data. Everybody has holes in their data. But we have some pretty good techniques for taking care of that. We can get that content into a form where we can curate it better. We can get good questions asked and get valuable answers out. And that's one of these three styles, by the way, is this notion of, I don't know what the questions will be, but I need to make my content ready to be able to provide those answers. One of the other styles is that I already am aware of the questions I need to know. Think contracts or invoices, etc., where you have essentially the same questions you need to ask of every document that you've either had in the past or that you're anticipating getting today and tomorrow. And the goal of AI in that case is less around the curation of content. It's more about, how do I make sure that I properly get correct answers, despite the fact that those documents are not structures that I get to prescribe. They're not the same structure, even if they are reasonably structured. They come in various forms, all that. So there's different challenges to solve typically. on the document understanding side versus the what we call Q&A side on the first use case. Now that third, just to be complete, is there's a whole bunch of natural language capabilities that as we build out a full orchestration, I'll introduce the idea in just a second, but when we need to really get rich use of language in an automated scenario, we end up needing a bunch of natural language processing capabilities like entity extraction, parsing of information, just a bunch of stuff, right? And those three are those three different types that we're talking about.
Yeah. So, John, if we think about these are things we're seeing with customers, very reusable patterns. This is not like, hey, we dreamed this up in a silo. We have multiple customers said, I have these three types of problems. Like, I have all my answers, but I know what questions they ask me. My chatbots have done a very good job of that. And then the others. So if we look at that first one of, okay, we've tried to solve this in the past with chatbots. People said, and they basically followed very traditional logic. A call tree that we learned about in, when that came into be in the 90s, unfortunately, it's like, well, if you answer this, then change this and change this. But what happens? It's call trees only work in very specific things like checking the status of a light, changing it never works. Great. You now put that on a website and you get frustrated. It's like, well, it offered me three things. That's not what I want. So
you're right. You're on a topic that's real interesting. So in almost every customer that we've seen, whether it's customer service, internal support, any number of them, there's some n number of things that represent 80% of the stuff, right? And you can actually pre-build your ability to handle those things, like the call tree was trying to do, right? But then there's this infinitely long tail of the final 20%. And how often do we find ourselves in that 20%, right? But there's definitely an opportunity to provide enough content for us to get even more than 80% of those answers, and then orchestrate real outcomes associated with those, and yes, leave humans to deal with that final 20% and continue to train, retrain, in order for us to get AI to remain effective at that we'll say the vast majority.
Yeah, the 20% of the long tail, I think that is like my MO. Like, I am always the guy that asks the exception, or the feedback is constantly, we've never gotten that question before. I'm like, how have you not, right? So that's really, really frustrating. But the other use case that you were talking about, John, outside of the obvious, the chat and then the chat bots just have all the problems, is what you were calling the known questions. So these are the questions that, I know the question, I don't know the answer. So think about, kind of a form, right? I have all the data that I want to collect, but I need to grab it. How are AI assistants, or what type of AI is helping companies do that? And I can think about like an RFI as a simple example.
Yeah. Well, not particularly simple, actually, in the case of an RFI. So we've had AI techniques for this for a long time. We had OCR, and we've used OCR, and OCR surprisingly never got great, right? And it continued to improve, and has even to this day, and some models are better than others, but it's never really gotten to just great status. And even now, we apply a variety of AI techniques in order to accomplish reading unstructured or image data or tables, figures, etc., and even multimedia, audio, video stuff. And it takes a combination of AI techniques with an interesting set of applications in order for that to really get effectively used. But we can do these use cases today that even 12 months ago we could not do. And when I say we, I don't mean Krista, I mean the industry. We're doing projects that I had never been able to say yes to, and projects we've been asked to do for decades.
So, you were mentioning an example that you couldn't do, or the industry couldn't do, as little as a decade ago that you can today. What were you thinking about?
Well, here's an actual case in point. We were asked by a large healthcare organization in Europe to deal with their inbound invoices and accounts payable. Well, okay, great. What makes that interesting? Well, thousands of them. So we were given 10,000 and said, hey, can you show us how effective Krista can be to do this? And by the way, they're in 7 different languages, and the VAT GST stuff is different from region to region and is coded differently. And oh, by the way, many of these vendor invoices, this was the funnest part of the discovery part of this. Many of the vendors don't actually put their name on the invoice. They just put the graphic of their logo on the invoice. And of course, many people's logos is not a picturesque version of the name. So can you just magically read all these and put it all in our AP system and follow all these business rules about what vendors can sell only, or we only buy a certain amount from, and pricing restrictions and all this other, yeah, they got a bunch of business rules, which you hope they had, right? And we have 10,000 of these, and we really need you to be effective because this is just such an expensive and challenging, time-consuming operation for us. It's really hard for us to keep staff that are willing to do the amount of front work it takes and in order to accomplish this. So sure enough, leveraging, again, this isn't a one-trick pony thing. This is a combination of techniques that we're able to deploy and make. We were at in our first shot, right? We're at 87% accuracy in all of that reading, and that's the beginning of a journey. By the way, that's higher than I would have even proposed that as a target. We want to be in that high 80s, 90s typically, but to be there right at the outset, I was actually impressed even with our own stuff. We went and spot checked the standard, right? Because they actually gave us the answers so that we could do a comparison. How do we know that we were 87%, right? The problem is that when we were measuring our effectiveness against what they reported, in fact, they were only accurate 62 something percent of the time. So the people doing the job were less effective than Krista was at doing that job. And yet Krista did it 1,000 times faster with higher accuracy, without having to explain to people, hey, I got a great idea. I'm going to pay you, a living wage maybe, but to do a really, really ugly, grunt work job until you decide to quit, because their turnover rate's like 66% per year. That's what we're talking about here, right? That's a project I could have never said yes to until within the last 6 months. And I've been asked to do that countless times, not even just within Krista, but I'm an old NLP geek. I've been doing this a long time. I've never been able to say yes to that project and do it. And to do it now, absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, that is interesting. You were talking about the logos. That just kind of reminded me of all the web content where you at least have to put all the alternate text in for images. One for sight impaired people, but 2, just so the search engines know what it is, right? It doesn't know the image; it knows all the text underneath it. So that's interesting. How did the other team? So when they were 62% accurate with people reviewing the documents, and then Krista was over 80%. How were they measuring the accuracy of both? Were they just using more invoices and test data, or were they using Krista to measure that, or how are they doing that?
So we actually use the source document, and you have people take the original output from the team that was doing that work, and you check it and realize that it was 62 something percent accurate. And then you do the exact same thing with us, right? You run those invoices through Krista's processing, and then you basically it's spot checks, right? We're not going to go do 10,000 of these. The funny thing is that once they got those results, they said, oh my gosh, let's go back and do a whole bunch more. And I sent them a link to Statistics for Dummies instead.
I'm sure they appreciated that. The cognitive dissonance of you just not believing the data that you're seeing is incredible. It happens a lot.
Yeah.
So then there was, the last of the use cases we kind of lumped into natural language processing, right?
Right.
and then what makes that different? And
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
interested in your answer because I know it's going to say that's just one point of, an entire workflow, right? Because that is the point, but people don't see it that way. They're like, if I just use a Gen AI or some type of LLM to like summarize a document, they think their job is done, but then they keep doing more work. Is that what you're
right,
talking about?
right. Well, you're triggering a common thing we hear all the time, which is if these LLMs can do X, Y, and Z, then I can do this, I can do that with it. I did this. In fact, I did this example where I got this, I did this, I did this, and it gave me that. I said, yeah, but you just said I 5 times. Do you not recognize what you just actually admitted to is that you're doing the vast majority of the work? And yes, that one particular task was performed by a particular model. That is great. It's full stop, right? That's absolutely great. But that is not by any means an orchestrated outcome run at machine speed that accomplished all the things both the I and the model were doing. That is what your competitor is going to do and going to beat you in the market. So you've got to think, not just if I can find an AI that then gives me or my people the ability to do some one thing better than they did a little bit faster or a little bit better or a little, that's all great, right? The incrementalism is great, but that's not transformation. You do that at the end of a journey where you've got vast amounts of application. You've exploited this thing so fully that it's done. And now in those gaps, you put little, hey, let's make that a little easier. Let's make that a little faster. You don't make that the strategy. And I think that's where there's a real challenge. So let's put this back on that third group, right? That third area of NLP area. And what that really is about is when you're trying to get that full orchestration where you might have a random question in a chatbot that you need to serve in type 1, if you will. And you've got, hey, I've got invoices I got to read all that information from in type 2. In type 3, it's, oh my gosh, the use case is inbound emails where I need to get the shipping address and make sure I don't get the mailing address out of the email because they could give me both, or there could be an address in the signature of their corporate mailing address or whatever it is, right? But if I'm looking for a shipping address, well, there's a whole area of NLP related to entity extraction, and there's a whole realm in NLP related to understanding text, comparing, are these messages enough similar that I can basically consider them the same? If someone answered a question, if someone asked a question, do you blah, 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 and you have content that you want to basically say, all right, does this match enough what our actual policy is or our actual answer is? Then I want to say yes. But if it doesn't, I want to explain the difference. There's another whole realm. And there's lots of these, so I won't exhaust you with it. But there are all those tools you will need to complete the job in a completely automated and orchestrated fashion, instead of it being I, and AI did a little bit, right? No, what you want is AI to do every part it can, and for orchestrating all of that to not be your job, but to be somebody else's job. That's the market we're in, obviously. It's why it's our perspective.
So, John, you've kind of described that there's these different techniques out there. And so I think a lot of people think, well, hey, I'll just use a Copilot, or I have developers. I'm just going to go grab a bunch of open source and they're going to use one thing from Hugging Face and it's just one tool's going to solve it. But our experience is there's lots of ways to search for things. Sometimes it's similarity of searches. Sometimes it's like semantic searches. Sometimes it's fuzzy logic. And so I don't think people realize that it's not, to do this actually is pretty complex and it takes a lot of different things. And so could you describe a little bit of like why is it important to have multiple ways to do natural language processing?
Yeah. So AI is software, if you will, in that it's a whole category with an enormous variety of types, styles, approaches, etc. The world is, being absolutely overwhelmed with discussion around the generative AI models, and there's obviously good reason for that. We're taking great advantage of those things, and I'm thrilled at the progress that's been made. Like I said, I'm an old NLP guy, so this is nirvana for me. And it's like wow, pinch me, am I still alive? We're finally getting to the point where we can achieve some of the things we've been working on so hard. But it's odd how it has crowded out the discussion around predicting dates, predicting numbers, classifying activities, identifying objects, anomaly detection, and countless other things that are incredibly valuable to a business in order to make that real vision of, I want automation of outcomes. I want to enable business to operate at machine speed. I got to get more. Yeah. So we're running around with the Gen AI hammer trying to whack everything right now. And we don't necessarily get too far doing that. We do hit some things we couldn't hit before, which is great. And even in leveraging the Gen AI models, you mentioned a few topics like the type of searching that you're doing. You're searching content before you'd ever prompt a model, by the way. In that search, there's there's kind of an over rotation to semantic search. I guess that's good for NVIDIA, given that most semantic searches, by the way, take a single piece of text and turn it into 1,536 double floating point numbers. And then you got to do a bunch of math on that for every one of the tokens or phrases, if you will, in your content to make comparisons on it. Well, no wonder GPU prices have exploded, and the pressure's all on the GPU guys. There's a whole super valuable, right? But there's another 2-3 other vectors you have to, I shouldn't have said the word vector. NLP guys will know what I mean. 2 or 3, 4 other aspects of analysis that really must be taken into account. And I'll give you an example of why I mean this. If someone asks a question of a large body of unstructured content, but it is a very precise question, what is Chris Kraus's birth date? You do not want a semantic analysis of vast amounts of content, especially if you have a table that has names, including Chris's, and a title column that is very closely resembles birth date or DOB, right? You want a lexical search on a precise piece of content, and you want to de-emphasize all of those other semantically relevant things like parties, other holidays, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? Because all of that semantically is close. That is only noise. You actually need a very different type of search to get that content, and you don't need to prompt an LLM to get the answer. In fact, I'm sure 100 times on this podcast already we've said we use LLMs. We give LLMs the answer. We don't ask them for the answer. This is one of those, it falls into that camp. So we've got lots of techniques that are all baked in and our customers just get, right? Because it's not like we're asking them all to become NLP experts. In order to make sure that we do our best job. So yes, the simple math says, grab LangChain, grab a Python developer, grab some React guy. Well, actually now that you think about it, that's probably like a half a dozen people with a bunch of software tools and a whole bunch of stuff and things to do. It actually gets quite laborious, even to do the very simplistic use case. But that immediately falls down as soon as you deal with complex documents, interesting shape of documents, multimodal, the image, video, etc. And you start asking interesting questions. Not to mention, only a third of those questions are a surrogate for a Google search where you actually just want content. The other whole 2/3 are that you need context of who the person is, which means access to live systems typically, or the answers in a live system. And then the final third, which is what you're actually asking for, is something to happen. Don't tell me about our vacation policy. I'm trying to tell you I'm taking vacation. Those are two different things. Quit telling me to talk to HR about how I can take vacation, because I'm asking HR. They gave me this chatbot. Only instead of telling me, yes, fine, you can take vacation next week, it keeps telling me here's how to take vacation. I hope I made that enough sense, because that's the whole problem is people ask questions wanting something to happen. And if all you've built is something that knows how to give content, and only that if it's semantically close to you are not answering the question, are you?
Yeah. And I guess one thing that we've learned from customers is they want to start small and expand, which is cool. But there's also a lot of fear of how does the security work? How do I handle privacy? Because if I'm starting to give data, it could be easy data. Here's an HR policy every employee has access to. But if it's something like, okay, here's birth dates, here's hire dates, here's salaries, here's review dates,
Yeah.
those type data, those things you mentioned are actually very specific. Like only managers would see them, or maybe someone in HR. So can you talk a little about how we need to, like, when we do this, put that eye on it? It's like, this isn't free data for everybody. Let's have, how do we want to secure it, but not make it so it's people never get access to it? Because it can go either way. It's like free beer or no beer, right? How do we go? What's in the middle?
Yeah. And it's unfortunate because you want to envision it, pardon me, as I'm just gonna dump all my content in this thing, this this AI tool I did, or I'm gonna prompt it all into one Gemini session. Like, well, you know what? Those context windows are large, but they're not a gigabyte. And by the way, even at a few thousand tokens, they still start to forget quite a bit. So what you really got to be doing is thinking, wait a minute, this is enterprise data. I have to have all those same enterprise data thinking, or all that I'm not thinking at the moment, all that same enterprise data thinking about that as well, right? So you tag the content by role or by attribute. We use attribute to mean maybe it's location, right? Canadian people get a different policy, Chris, and probably don't want to see the US policy. Certainly, given some of the labor laws here versus there, I don't even want my folks seeing the stuff that we have to do for people in Canada that we decide not to do for folks in the US. I don't want them reading those policies. Please don't create that nightmare for me, right?
Yeah,
that sort of stuff, right?
You don't want U.S. employees to read the Europe vacation schedule, right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's correct. Now, I mean, is this an example of one? We're being cheeky here, guys. I hope you're following along with that. But is that like literally I don't, it's like bad enterprise data management if I don't? Maybe not. But definitely would confuse an AI model if you have two exact documents that say US and Europe, and they're both the same dates and vacation. So now what is that AI model going to do? Semantically know that, no. It's going to basically give you no answer, or it's going to get over answer. It's going to say, well, that depends on where you live. If you live here, it's going to do this. And if it's that, by the time you're at paragraph 3, I'm thinking, I thought it was going to get a yes or no, right? Do we get Memorial Day off? 3 paragraphs later, was that a yes? Right? But if you do this, you leverage the techniques correctly, where you don't even consider in the search those pieces of content that are not relevant via attribute, like we're not in Europe. Those documents that have an attribute of Europe, and we don't have that attribute. Or role, I'm not an executive of the company, so I am not about to see the salary spreadsheet, or the salary spreadsheet is not even going to be considered even in the search. Well, now what's happening is we're searching only on relevant content, which means we're much more likely to have consistency in the content that we actually give to an LLM. And when we give it a good set of consistent content, we get a good answer. Now, almost immediately after that, you have to think, well, wait, I'm one of those companies that has lots of content in this thing, and then none in all kinds of areas. People will ask questions. Yeah, you and everyone else. So we have to calculate a coverage score and a comprehensive score. By the way, the comprehensiveness of the question, what is Chris Kraus's birth date? And there's a table with a birth date in that's 100%, right? That one's easy. But when you ask a broad question and you only have some content related, you're not going to get a very high confidence score out of Krista. And that's going to tell you, maybe I need to say, hey, I don't have enough for me to tell you anything about this just yet, but I'm going to go get some help. We're going to get additional feedback on this question, and I'm going to get you an answer, which our system is able to do quite naturally. By the way, every one of our customers has some form of this because no one's data is perfect, right? Everybody's got to continuously curate content as well, right? Your point of view about topics is different today than it was 24 months ago, and it'll be different 24 months from now. So you will have this constant curation thing, and all of that is stuff. Obviously, we've been doing this a long time. We've been doing these use cases pre-2023, right? So before everyone thought this was a thing, we were doing it. So it's obviously something we've got to maturity there.
All right. Sounds good, John. Thanks. I can think of 100 different examples of where people are doing all this extra activity and work and thinking that it's automated, but it's not. So we explored the different ways that organizations can, answer and ask questions from the different data documents. Clearly you can't just put employees in front of Gemini or ChatGPT and hope this works. There's just too many privacy and security concerns. But we're going to go into that into greater detail in our next episode, where we explore the unknown questions. So we're going to go through all the security requirements, privacy requirements, prompt engineering, everything that you would need to provide an interface for your employees to find real answers from your, both structured and unstructured data, whether it's in documents or systems or whatever. So hope you guys join us for next time. John, thanks so much for your time. Chris, thank you as well for co-hosting this episode. And until next time.